Where were you when the throne of capitalism shuddered, when Wall Street felt the weight of its sins? It was 2010, 4 years after the housing bubble burst, and nearly 400 financial institutions had crumbled, sending the economy into a tailspin, that the country's tragedy turned into potential. The national economy lay in ruins like spent order sheets on the New York Stock Exchange floor, and the future of the country was tenuous at best. Countless homeowners walked through the thresholds of their homes for the last time as foreclosures mounted, and the people's despair quickly turned into righteous anger. For the first time, America saw its dependence on its financial juggernauts for what it was, a symptom of a sickening greed. It became obvious that the financial institutions that held the fates of so many in their parasitic hands were in fact too big to fail, and that the American people would have to come to the rescue via increased taxes. Bank executives like Chuck Prince, Stanley O'Neill, and Angela Mozilla assumed that their close ties to government ensured their immunity from prosecution, but as the numbers of people on the street grew, and as the nation rumbled with the sounds of dissent, a collective scalpel to the throat of Eric Holder and the Securities and Exchange Commission ensured that these men, unlike the banks themselves, were not too big to jail. Since the mass incarcerations of fraudulent bankers, thousands of banks have received nearly $1 trillion in tax bailouts as part of a comprehensive recovery plan. These monies, as a form of self-preservation on behalf of taxpayers, came with strict conditions. Creative court sentencing and the effective enforcement of punitive mandates resulted in the physical and vertical transformation of major city landscapes. The vertical, flat spaces of corporations like J.P. Morgan Chase, GM Motors, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America were co-opted by and for the people to serve a greater good.
Imagine a world where the advertisements that once coerced us into competing with one another now put us face to face with our own humanity, eliciting empathy in place of envy. If corporate greed with all its facades could fade away behind the scaffolding of a new world view, what if these public spaces served as a platform for our personal stories? If the city provided us with spaces that remind us of who we were as a nation and who we want to be. If the gray, cold, and unfeeling surfaces of the city could somehow light up with the fleshy tones of our human experience. What if we could feel the weight of our decisions, of our every step, and stare into the eyes of those who are displaced, dislodged, and discouraged by our often mistaken need for excess? What if our external cityscapes confronted and revealed our often conflicted, fractured internal collective selves, coercing us to be critical of our choices without feigning homogeneity or hiding our differences in opinion, but forces us to actually speak to one another? What if we could not turn away from the lives of our brothers and sisters around the world? If we could celebrate and mourn together? Perhaps our ever-expanding and hectic lives would contract a little bit. Perhaps we'd leave room for and consider the other. Perhaps we'd see ourselves reflected back in the surfaces of a city that once buried our beautiful differences. And maybe just maybe we'd look up one day and catch a glimpse of that ineffable light that traces the contours of our own humanity.